Hi, I'm Brian from Simply Brian Enterprises and welcome to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at the homework solution for TopTechBoy's Raspberry Pi Pico series, lesson number 18. If you recall, in lesson 17, we were given the assignment of taking a single red push button to control a single red LED, press the button on, press the button off. Well, in lesson 18, we're going to take that a logical step further. We're going to be using the RGB LED and using a red, green, and blue push button to accomplish the same sort of thing on all three color channels, thus giving us the ability to also mix colors. One of the things I want to point out with this lesson, and really lessons going forward, we're starting to get more complex in terms of reading inputs and writing outputs. And so as we're doing that, we start to get to a place of really thinking about program design and program flow and logic. And we start to come up with these different ways of doing things. And one of the reasons this has taken me so long is that I had a couple other designs in mind that I've since scrapped to come up with my final design. And that took me a lot longer than I hoped. Another thing is just the fact that, I do have a life outside of TopTechBoy. I have a job, and apparently one of my jobs, according to some of you, is a roadie. I don't know where you would get that idea from, but that could be one of the things that I do when I'm not working on TopTechBoy assignments. Before I begin with the program, though, I do have a question for the TopTechBoy community. I raised it in the chat last week. Why is there this floating heart in my chat window and YouTube that just started about a week ago? For some reason, this thing has just popped up. You can see it kind of covers the text. I can't make it go away. It's driving me crazy, and I don't know how I got it or how to get rid of it. So if any of you have any comments on that, I'd love to hear a comment below. All right, enough about that. Let's take a look at the hardware. So we've gone to really taking what I had set up last week, because even though the assignment was a red LED, I just continued using the RGB LED because I had it wired up. So I have my red push button, and of course now I've added my green and my blue, and I just felt like it wouldn't be right to leave the yellow sitting in the baggie all by itself. So I decided to incorporate the yellow push button into my design this week as well. I do want to draw your attention down here and notice that, oh, there's my finger. I'm using just a jumper wire with no resistors this week. So I talked a little bit last week about pull up and pull down resistors, and I didn't really explain why I choose pull up versus pull down. Pull down would make sense because that brings the pin to 0, and then when you press the button, you would send it to +3. So when it's down, it would be false, and up it would, or I'm sorry, when it is up unpressed, it would be false, and when you press down, it would be true. Using a pull up resistor, of course, reverses that. If you're not pressing the button, it's true. If you press the button, it's false. It would seem a little more logical to use a pull down resistor in this scenario. But the reason I've chosen not to is because if I use a pull down resistor, that means if I press the button and send a full 3.3 volts into the pin, that is the full current from the 3.3 volt supply. So it's coming off of the supply through the push button and right back into a GPIO pin. Now, technically that's okay, but if I was using, say, an extra power supply, something that could deliver a couple of amps, 3 volts, that could potentially fry my Pico, and I don't want to fry my Pico. So typically I'm going to be using a pull-up resistor, and that is what I'm doing this week. The only difference is I'm using the pull-up in the code versus on the breadboard. So I wanted to explain that just a little bit before we start running the program. And there's something on my breadboard I don't want there. Okay. So I'm going to put on my diffuser, and I'm going to try to line this up so the diffuser behaves itself this week. And so if I press down on the red button, the red light comes on. If I press down on the green button, trust me, that is green. I have played with the camera settings as much as I possibly can, and I cannot make it look green on camera, but believe me, in person, that is green. And then when I press on the blue button, uh-oh, blue is for special occasions only. I'm going to have to find a way to force the blue button to work. I wonder if maybe if I hold down the yellow button, and then press the blue button. Is that going to give me permission? Hey, look at that. If I press down the yellow and the blue, then I get the blue LED on. And now I can start to do, since it's persistent on and off, I can start to do color mixing. So here I'm going to add in the green, and I'm going to get a cyan, and I can add in a red, and I'm going to get something that's close-ish to white. It looks a lot more white in person, as you probably realize. And now if I take green away, I'm going to get just blue and red, so I have a beautiful magenta. And now I'm going to turn off the blue, back to red and green, and I should get, if you could see it properly, you could get a nice yellow. And now I can go through and turn them off. And now let's take a closer look at the code. So this is where the sticking point really came for me this last really couple of weeks in trying to get this lesson produced, is how many ways do I want to do this? And the first way I thought, let me flip back here quick. The first way I thought is actually using the yellow button to produce a yellow color. And the way I would do that is I would incorporate, instead of doing just a binary on and off, full brightness or nothing, actually using PWM. So I'd hit the yellow and it would set PWM values for all three LEDs and produce a yellow. And then if I mixed in, let's say blue, I would get another mixed color. Or if I mixed in green or red, like a yellow and red is going to give me an orange. A yellow and green is going to give me basically a green or yellow. So I could do some fun things that way. But as I was thinking about it, the math got too complex, and I just didn't want to muddy the waters too much in that. One design decision I did make, though, is using dictionaries. And so I've got my input pins in a dictionary, my output pins in a dictionary. I have my pin function of my output pins in a dictionary. I have my input functions of the input pins in a dictionary. And here you can see I'm using the built-in pull-up resistor. That's why I don't have one on the breadboard. And I'm also using a dictionary to track my states. I really liked how compact this made my whole setup look, because this is where I'm going through, setting up all my variables, setting everything to 0, making everything look nice, and it is actually nice and compact in the code and easily readable. So it's, in my opinion, a good use of dictionaries. So now I come down into our while loop, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read all 4 values from the input pins. This was a design decision I made. I want to go all the way through the loop with the same input values unless they change. So in order to do that, I write them as variables to begin with, and then I'm going to manipulate the variables as we go through the loop. So here, the first if statement, we get to evaluating the red tact switch. So if it's false, remember, so if it's a pull-up, it's always going to be true. So if it's false, meaning it's pressed down, we're going to enter into this loop. I have these little 50 millisecond sleep delays in here because for some reason, if I don't pause the program slightly on a read, it'll either pull the wrong value or it won't read a value at all, and you'll get very unpredictable results. So I have these little 50 millisecond reads in here, or I should say 50 millisecond delays after a read to make sure that I got a proper read on it. And then, as I've done before, while I'm holding that button down, I'm going to first get into this false statement, and then I'm going to say while it's false. So while I'm holding the button down, we're basically just sleeping for 50 milliseconds, reading it again, and we're in that loop until I let go. And then once I let go of the button, then we're going to change our state. So I'm going to take the current state, I'm going to write the dictionary value of current state red with the opposite of the last state red. And then I'm going to save the current state into the last state. So now if it was off, we're going to write it as on, and then we're going to write the last state as on. If it was on, then we're going to write the current state as off, and then the last state as off. And then we're going to print out to the console all 3 colors, the state of all 3 LEDs. And here's where I want to point out Lori's video that she produced a couple of weeks ago on output formatting in PicoPython. And I will link to that below because it's a fantastic video talking about the different ways to format outputs. And Here I'm using F strings, which I've now studied up a little bit on thanks to Lori's video, but I do want to draw attention to that because it's a fantastic video on setting up output strings and making very readable output. For the green button, it's exactly the same as the red, excuse me. So I'm just reading in the green button state, going into the loop, flipping the bit if there's a change, and then writing out the current status. Now blue gets a little different because if the blue LED is on, pressing the blue push button, let me try that again. If the blue LED is on, pressing the blue push button will turn it off. If the blue LED is off, pushing the blue button will not turn it on. We need to invoke the yellow button to do that. So I have these if statements of, basically I've got two cases on and off. Which one am I going to decide to do? And that's one of those areas where when I was thinking about possibly doing PWM and color mixing, that got to be a real challenge. One of the reasons I decided not to do it. Then when I get to the yellow button, now we're getting really complicated because I have to hold down the yellow button and I have to read both the yellow and blue at the same time. So now I'm going to wait until the blue status changes. And then when I release the blue and then release the yellow, then I can change the blue status to on, and again write out the values. And then, as you've seen in my videos before when I'm doing LED outputs, I set all of the variables first, and then I actually at the end write them out once. That way, if there's a change partway through the program, the change will get written into that same variable, so the new value will overwrite the old value, and then it gets written out to the LED the one time. So that is, I hope, a helpful description of how that program works. I do want to point out, and this is one of the things that I was really contemplating whether I wanted to tackle in lesson 18. Ultimately, I decided not to. One of the problems that we run into is that while we're holding down the button, program flow stops. And that's going to become a problem when we're doing live inputs and outputs, like, for instance, reading from the DHT11 that we're going to do in coming lessons. We can't stop program flow because that means if there's a change in temperature, change in humidity, we're not going to read that. We have to do a different method of reading that in. And I thought about implementing that in lesson 18, just got too complicated. So I'm going to save that for a future lesson. If you like this video, I hope that you'll like and subscribe below. Leave a comment, and I look forward to seeing you next time. For TopTechBoy Enterprises, this is Brian, and thank you for watching.